You're watching Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Julia Kim, and these are the headlines. The United Kingdom ignores a deadline to hand back the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. The Mauritian Prime Minister has called the UK an illegal colonial occupier. Guinea Bissau prepares to head to the polls in Sunday's presidential elections. All 12 candidates have pledged to tackle the country's drug trafficking problem. Our correspondent brings you an exclusive report later on in the show. And 6 decades after gaining independence from France, Niger decides to change its national anthem. It follows complaints that the lyrics give thanks to its former colonial rulers for their freedom. But first, the Mauritian Prime Minister has called the United Kingdom an illegal colonial occupier after it ignored a UN deadline to hand back the Chagos Islands. Britain had 6 months to do so, but that deadline has now passed, sparking protests in Mauritius. Well, the dispute dates back decades. In 1965, when both Mauritius and the Chagos Islands were British colonies, the UK offered Mauritius independence and £3 million in exchange for the archipelago. Britain then forced hundreds of Chagosians to leave their lands to make way for a joint US military airbase. Many settled in the UK, but today they face tougher immigration laws which put their futures in doubt. Well, earlier I spoke to Stefan Donnelly from the UK Chagos Support Association.
The UN vote 6 months ago did indeed approve a motion saying that the UK should cede control of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius within 6 months. But that motion isn't legally binding in any strict sense. There's no mechanism to force the UK to hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. So that's why today we've been urging both Mauritius and the UK government to start listening to the Chagosian people, to work with them to make sure that their rights can be put first.
Now, let's go back in time a bit. Back into the 1960s and 70s, there was a lot of controversy because the UK had expelled people to make way for a new military base it was building with the United States. How were the people back then affected by Britain's presence, particularly on that island of Diego Garcia?
As you say, the main effect was that Chagosians were forced to leave the Chagos Islands as a result of the deal between the UK and the US to build a military base. Many experts say it was never really necessary that they leave, and indeed they could and would be happy to return with the base remaining. That's what Mauritius's position is as well, that they would retain the base. But in exile after deportation, promised support, compensation, housing, jobs just didn't arrive, or arrived 5-6 years later, or at very limited value. People got into debt, they suffered discrimination, they struggled to get into school, couldn't afford schools, and struggled to get good jobs. And it's led to a lot of intergenerational poverty, a lot of sadness, a lot of problems in the community that continue to this day, including those immigration issues that you mentioned in your piece, that also affect Chagosians living in the UK, which means that the grandchildren of those Chagosian deportees are now sometimes threatened with deportation from the UK, despite having British parents and grandparents.
Now, as you said, of course, the UN decision was non-binding. What next if the UK continues to ignore calls for them to hand back the Chagos Islands? What will happen to them?
It's difficult to say what will happen next, especially at the moment. We've just had an election in Mauritius. There's a new government there. There's going to be an election in the UK very soon. There'll be a new government there. Different parties have different positions on the future of the Chagos Islands. Some support Chagosian resettlement, and some don't at the moment. And so we think this is a really good opportunity, with the world's eyes on the Chagos Islands for once, with lots of bodies and lots of individuals actually today learning about the Chagos Islands, throwing their support behind the Chagosian people. It's a really good opportunity for the two governments and indeed the UN to work together to put Chagosians' rights first, because fundamentally their priority is that right to return, the right to their homeland, and for fair treatment after 50 years of neglect and often outright abuse in exile.
Well, Guinea Bissau heads to the polls this Sunday for a presidential election, as well as campaigning. Police officers got to cast their votes early. 12 candidates, including incumbent President Jose Maria Vaz, are in the running. All of them have promised to clean up the country's reputation as a narco-state. The instability of the West African nation has made it an attractive trafficking destination for Colombian cocaine. Our correspondent in Guinea Bissau, Sarah Sacco, reports.
This shopkeeper wants to keep his identity secret. He's suspected of transporting cocaine to a neighbouring country and is waiting for his trial. But he says he's innocent.
I've been in this business for 20 years. All I do is send fish to the Gambia, to Mali and Senegal. It's my only job.
He was contacted by a couple of men supposedly interested in buying fish. He agreed to deliver their order in a truck they supplied and asked him to drive. But when he tried to leave the capital, the police stopped him.
I don't know how they did it, but they managed to cut into the truck's bodywork to hide the drugs. But there was nothing suspicious about the fish, though. Now I've got nothing left. Do you see how I was used? No one is going to reimburse me. Everyone knows that I don't have anything to do with drugs.
Mammoth drug seizures are frequent in Guinea-Bissau. In September, the police made the biggest find in the country's history. Nearly 2 tons of cocaine from Colombia arrived by sea in the country's northwest. After a 2-week intelligence operation with Interpol, police arrested 12 people. A sign that Guinea-Bissau is far from finished with South American cartels. The biggest obstacle in the fight against drug trafficking is the legal system's weak response, according to the specialist.
The political class is involved. Justice will only be competent if the public prosecutor and the judicial police have the means to investigate and to uncover the political implications in this traffic.
Our request for interviews with the authorities remain unanswered. Drug smuggling in the country's remote islands and unpoliced mangrove creeks remains a key concern for voters in Guinea-Bissau.
Sarah Sacco and Emmanuel Landé with that report there. Now let's take a quick look at some other news in Africa. Algeria's anti-government protest movement marks its 40th week, with thousands taking to the streets to oppose a December 12th presidential election. Many believe the vote will be rigged to keep a corrupt political elite in power. 5 candidates are running after former President Bouteflika was forced out in April following mass protests. Since then, thousands have been protesting weekly, demanding a complete overhaul of Algeria's political system. The Democratic Republic of Congo has declared a natural disaster in 3 territories after severe flooding. Weeks of heavy rain have displaced at least 50,000 people in Likuala, La Cuvette, and Plateau. Homes, farms, and livestock have been washed away. Some have been left starving after food reserves were ruined. The deluge also led to a resurgence in waterborne diseases. And South African Airways flights will resume this weekend after the company reached a deal with unions. The state-owned airline had grounded its planes for a week after its staff went on strike over pay and job losses. The carrier agreed to raise wages by nearly 6% and deferred a decision to lay off hundreds of workers. The SAA has failed to make a profit since 2011 and survives on government bailouts. Now, 6 decades after gaining independence, Niger is changing its national anthem. The current song's lyrics thank the country's former colonizer, France, for its freedom. It was written in 1961 by a French songwriter, but today many feel it's out of tune with modern times. Maud Julien reports.
Lyrics from another era. Let us be proud and grateful, goes Niger's national anthem, for our newfound freedom. The country's president, Mahamadou Issoufou, spoke on Thursday with a committee charged specifically with changing this part of the song, which critics say implies deference to the country's former colonial ruler. In Niger's capital, Niamey, many say they want a new anthem.
We are pleased with the government's decision to change this anthem and to choose one that will represent us better, in which the people of Niger can feel their pride reflected.
For 58 years we've been hearing this anthem, which doesn't reflect our realities and which has colonial traits. This anthem tells us nothing. It has nothing to do with us.
The song was written 1 year after the country's independence by two French composers who won an international contest despite having no specific knowledge of Niger. It's not the first anthem to prove controversial. Cameroon's rallying song, in its 1923 version, spoke of parting with savagery and barbarism. Its lyrics were changed in 1970.
Well, Zimbabwe has gone a step further to try and shed its colonial past. Its government has announced plans to rename major roads and buildings after national heroes. It's also said it will name 10 streets after President Emerson Mnangagwa. Although colonial rule ended 40 years ago, many roads, schools and landmarks still bear the name of British heroes. However, many Zimbabweans are angry and concerned that the cabinet is discussing this while the country struggles with its worst economic crisis in years. And that's all from us here on Eye on Africa. There's more news coming up here on France 24. Stay tuned.
France 24. Every art form.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.